Story 1. She admitted she used to talk softly, so I couldn't hear her, even though she knew I had hearing issues with severe tinnitus. Story 2. He arrived to pick me up on a motorcycle. He had a helmet for himself but not for me. He never mentioned that he owned a motorcycle before the date. Story 3. My feelings turned off like a light switch when he rejected my hug because it was at his workplace and his colleague was there. I broke up with him then. I had no qualms. I was just done. Over. There was no chance of fixing anything. Story 4. I was going to a friend's punk show at the local record and bookstore. He was driving and complained the whole way about how he didn't understand why I was wasting money on a temporary experience because it cost $8 to get in. Mind you, he wasn't even going, just dropping me off, so it wasn't like he was paying $8. I tried to explain to him that it was just $8, and I was happy to support my friends. Plus, I'd get a night of fun doing something I'd never done before since I never go anywhere or do anything because he didn't want to. He just went on and on about how he didn't get why I'd want to do something like that when it would just be over in a few hours. He kept repeating that it was temporary. I finally turned to him and said, "Life is a temporary experience, so I'm going to enjoy mine while I have it." When he told me that was stupid, I replied, "We have very different views on life. I think we're just fundamentally incompatible people." That was the moment it all clicked in my head. He didn't really enjoy anything. He hated going places because it was a waste of time and money. He hated staying home because it was unproductive. He hated pursuing his hobbies if he couldn't monetize them. He hated socializing because he felt like it was a game where he had to choose the right response to level up the friendship meter. He didn't like food because he always chose food he actively hated, as he only ate to maximize his protein and calorie intake. I didn't want to be with someone who made life itself seem so miserable. I used to be severely depressed, and I could feel myself being dragged back into that by his constant negativity. I knew I couldn't spend the rest of my life like that. Story 5. When he kept getting upset over trivial matters, I didn't want to be with someone who got angry so easily. Story 6. He lost his erection during sex and became so upset that I felt unsafe. He claimed it had never happened before, which seemed surprising to me since it felt like a normal thing. He got up and became angry enough to start kicking the door, and at that moment, I questioned whether I even liked this person. It felt like a veil was lifted, and I suddenly realized I couldn't stand his constant victim mentality. It's unfortunate because I know he probably interpreted my reaction as being about his lack of arousal, but I was genuinely disgusted and scared by how he handled the situation. It made me recognize that I generally disliked his behavior. Story 7. Addictions can lead to emotional immaturity and unavailability. These individuals are unlikely to contribute positively and are more likely to disrupt a currently peaceful and fulfilling life. When I refer to value, it is not a judgment of their worth as a person. Rather, they are simply not in a position to be a healthy candidate for a relationship. Story 8. She turned into a different person when she drank, and at first it was kind of fun. She was feistier and honestly more entertaining, but it started getting worse. She would share intimate details of our relationship, make fun of me in cruel ways, and the final straw was when she threw a dart at me. It wasn't an accident. She saw me standing between her and the dartboard, and I watched in slow motion as it flew toward my face. Thankfully, I squinted hard enough that it just bounced off my eyelid, but that was it for me. When I got upset about it, she threw a drink in my face in front of everyone at the party. She moved out a few weeks later and took the dog. I missed that dog. Story 9. There are about 40 different things here, but I'll list a few. I'm so overweight. Fishing for compliments for the 1,000th time. I replied, "Well, maybe we should eat better. You could start jogging or something," only to be met with, "That's just not me." Having friends over for game night, opening a closet in the dining area only to have a landslide of papers, garbage, and diapers comically fall out. Coming home after weeks on board a submarine and never being greeted at the pier, only to receive a text asking me to pick up a bacon cheeseburger for her on my way home. It took an extra 30 minutes of round trip driving to get the burger, while she was nestled on the couch with a laptop and a dozen empty soda cans and bottles scattered around. Her threatening to leave because I sometimes did not want to do or buy things, This was actually what spurred the divorce. One last comment. Well, if you won't even do this simple thing for me, then why don't I just leave? Prompted my thoughtless response. Yeah, why don't you? I think you should leave. Story 10. When I had to either be with her or on a phone call with her almost every minute of my day. Story 11. My first wife. I don't remember what exactly happened, but there was a moment when I looked at her and thought, there is no way I'm having children with this person. Granted, she was an emotional mess, and she had been getting worse over time. Things had piled up, and it was as if a switch had flipped. One day, I simply said, no. Story 12. I took care of my ex-wife for almost a decade because they were virtually disabled by depression and anxiety. When the worst possible family tragedy happened to me, not only did they not support me, but they also told me I wasn't getting better quickly enough. My mother had jumped from a high rise, and this person insisted I had to get better soon so I could return to being their caregiver. They were the most selfish narcissist I have ever known. When we went to couples counseling to try to work things out, the entire session was my ex crying and having a mental breakdown over their anxiety. They didn't even give me a chance to talk about what I was going through. The counselor said we shouldn't continue until my ex could resolve their own issues, and we never returned to counseling. People talk about weaponized incompetence. This felt like weaponized mental illness. My ex-wife took no accountability for any of their actions. Everything could be explained away by their mental illness, for which they did not seek medical help or take medication. While I worked at a demanding tech job, my ex would brag about how hard they worked in therapy. When I tried to get a divorce, they had another mental breakdown and asked me to stay until they were better. This lasted 18 years until I was dead inside and suicidal. I had my own breakdown and we got a divorce. I had to pay over $1 million to this person for this experience because of California law. I must financially support them for the rest of their life. Story 13. Maybe this is petty, but she thought the old lady from the Titanic movie and Joan of Arc were the same person. After just a couple of weeks of dating, I found out she was filled with too much misinformation for me to handle. Story 14. We were in a long-distance relationship and began discussing polyamory. This led to many related conversations about how we viewed our relationship. I realized she intended to treat our relationship as a safety net in case things didn't work out instead of a foundation to build on. That's not going to work for me. At least I can say I did the work and know for certain that polyamory is not for me. Story 15. When we spent one day a month together while living within walking distance, she always had events to attend and didn't want to waste her days off work. I was only invited if I coerced her to extend the invitation, and sometimes not even then. I had to argue with her to convince her to come to my birthday instead of spending time with her friends. I eventually realized that all her excuses were just excuses, and she did not prioritize me or love me as I loved her. I hate that she stayed with me, and that I had to break up with her when I was the one who cared about the relationship. This is difficult. Story 16. She wanted me to cut her with a box cutter during our first encounter. I'm open to exploring, but that is extreme for a first experience, and I'm terrified of what she might want if we become comfortable with each other. Story 17. I was walking to a Halloween party with my college girlfriend. Suddenly, we heard Star Wars music blasting from a window, and 3 guys dressed as Jedi ran onto the quad for a lightsaber battle. They were having fun. Her reaction: what a bunch of losers. Story 18. When I realized he was a mama's boy, I understood she was the reason we broke up. He would justify every rude comment she made toward me by saying, "Oh, she doesn't mean it. I don't know, maybe it isn't significant," but I couldn't tolerate her disrespecting me every single time there was a family dinner. Never again. Story 19. When he yelled at me for hours because we left dinner with his friends 10 minutes early due to my not feeling well. He was easily angered, and I noticed it early in the 4th date. Beware of men with anger issues. Story 20. He refused to get a job and stayed at home urinating into soda bottles for some reason. His mother also called me a gold digger. Keep in mind I was the only one working and paying for his car payment, his insurance, the rent, the food, and the utilities, but sure, I am a gold digger. Story 21. When she felt anxious at work, I listened to her and consoled her, assuring her it would pass. I mentioned that I was cooking salmon and asparagus for when she got home. When I experienced anxiety at work, I was told to manage my emotions. For the record, I didn't need her to manage my emotions. I just wanted to express myself and perhaps receive an "I love you." Story 22. A woman, around 3 years older than me, from my city messaged me on Instagram and invited me for drinks. The woman I met on the date was a 45-year-old obese man who believed he could turn lesbian straight. Story 23. It was prom night, and I had some friends over along with my boyfriend at the time. My parents bought us drinks, including a 12-pack of Redd's Apple Ale. When we got back, I decided to have one. A few sips later, I heard the door slam, and my boyfriend was pacing angrily in the driveway, saying I was an alcoholic and I needed to choose between him or the alcohol. I walked back inside, handed him his tuxedo and said, "The alcohol," then went back in to hang out with my friends. It's important to note that this was a special occasion, and I rarely drank. When I did, I was never mean and would never pressure him to drink. A few days later, he called, begging for me to come back, telling me that he had never shared about his father, whom I had never met because his parents were divorced. Being a physically abusive alcoholic, I felt horrible and we talked it out. Fast forward a month and I was talking to his mother. She brought up his father, and I mentioned something like, "That must be really tough, him struggling with alcoholism." I swear she nearly slammed on the brakes with her look of utter shock. I explained what he had told me, and his mom said, "I left him when my son was 2, and he has never been alone with him since. He is a traveling priest who was never home. That's why we got divorced. That man never laid a hand on any of us. And in our 10 years of marriage, I never saw him drink alcohol. So, safe to say, we broke up after that, and I never really found out what the issue was with that drink in the first place." Side note, I chain-smoked cigarettes at the time, so if there was a hill to die on, you'd think it would have been that. In summary, my ex-boyfriend left me on prom night because one Redd's Apple Ale made me an alcoholic, giving him a reason to lie about having an abusive and alcoholic father. Story 24. I received a significant promotion at work, and I was very proud and happy. I had never received a promotion before. While we were driving to dinner, as soon as I told her, she immediately changed the topic to some unnecessary work drama. Story 25. When I discovered that he searched for inappropriate content in his browser history, along with the fact that I needed to check the history in the first place, and considering his obsession with the Flowers in the Attic series and his closeness with his sister, you can see where I'm heading. Story 26. When he got too involved in family matters, I was venting about a minor incident involving my dad's Jeep and my Nissan. It was just a scratch, but I was upset that my dad suggested I should take a rideshare service, which costs $60 per ride. Later that night, while we were playing a game, he reminded me about the vehicle registration tags, which I was unaware were due for renewal. I informed my dad about it. Additionally, he thought we should transfer the car title from my late mother's name to my sister and me, as stated in my mom's will. My dad quickly printed the necessary documents for us to sign. When I told my boyfriend what had just happened, he reacted by saying, "How dare you sign anything without my permission?" His reaction made me second-guess what I had signed, prompting me to return to my dad's room to verify, something my family knows I rarely do. My dad asked what was going on, and I told him I was asked to check. He then insisted that I text him to say I would never talk to him again, to hang up, and to give him my phone. I did just that. The next day, I felt foolish for not recognizing the red flags that I had ignored. They were overlooked because I was young and inexperienced. It was my first serious relationship as an adult. Now, I have found someone who genuinely cares about me and my interests. Story 27. She was genuinely enraged at some girls on stage at a trivia event because she wanted to be up there, and they didn't know the answers. She started yelling and booing them. It was a huge turnoff, especially since she was already being dismissive and patronizing toward me. Story 28. My girlfriend and I sat down to talk because I noticed she had been distant lately. During our conversation, she brought up an incident from the past when my 8-year-old son commented that I had bad breath, which is typical since I drink coffee. My girlfriend concluded that when my son said I had bad breath, she believed it meant I had been with another woman. That night, I ended the relationship. She had deep mistrust in me and constantly questioned me about other women, which was not true. In summary, my son pointed out that I had bad breath, and my girlfriend interpreted it as evidence of infidelity. Story 29. The way he kissed me was unexpected. I had never experienced someone pushing their tongue so far back in my mouth. It was a significant turnoff. Story 30. When I realized that I probably would not have been able to be friends with this person, a former boyfriend, had we met under different circumstances as friends first. Story 31. When I had to clean up her life, I quickly realized I didn't respect her and I would never come back from that. So I pretended long enough to maintain access to her life, helped her remove her criminal ex from her life, sorted out her work situation, built up some self-esteem to take charge of things going forward, and then had to cut her loose. Unfortunately, I have a tendency to take on projects, so I stopped dating at a certain point, and I have honestly been much healthier since. I miss the comfort of having someone to turn to, but it's the idea, not the reality. Story 32. That time she threatened to harm herself and then tried to stab me seemed like a warning sign. Perhaps I overreacted. At that moment, there were many warning signs that I was too inexperienced and insecure to recognize or respond to. I wish I could grab my younger self and shake him. Story 33. The day I gave birth to our very premature baby, I also had a 103-degree fever. Is your mouth still worth it? Story 34. We were broke, the kind where I didn't even have an extra $5. He didn't contribute around the house and constantly yelled at me for being lazy. When he did help, he employed incompetence as a tactic. One day, he stacked our fragile, expensive wedding gift plates on top of a mixing bowl with a rolling pin sticking out. Moments later, they crashed to the floor, and about half our plates broke at once. We couldn't afford to replace them, not even with those from a dollar store. I screamed at him about how stupid and useless he was, while also telling myself to stop because it's wrong to shout cruel things you don't truly mean. Then I realized I meant it. I started making plans to leave the next day. Story 35. I realized they were always sharing personal information about various others. This made me reflect on what business of mine they were sharing with other people. Story 36. Back in college, she loved everything about me except my glasses, hairstyle, clothing, music preferences, and sense of humor. Essentially, she seemed to have an issue with everything that made me who I am. Story 37. When I realized I was the strong one in the relationship and that I would spend forever trying to keep them together. Story 38. He told me I had halitosis, which wasn't true. I later discovered that he was dating someone else and had actually said that just to end things with me. Story 39. When partners chose not to be straightforward about their intentions, desires, or actions, were unaccountable, and refused to apologize or consider fault, they often groaned or grumbled at the start of a conversation or even at the slightest inconvenience. They enabled toxic loved ones or continued poor behaviors, did not include or consider me in important life-changing decision-making or conversations, and moved through life as if I were not a factor. Additionally, they showed abusive tendencies. Story 40. We were together for 7 years, starting when I was 26. Eventually, we each realized what we wanted out of life, including our living situations. She wanted to live 15 minutes from the nearest stoplight, while I wanted to live in or as close as possible to a large city. That was our biggest conflict. Story 41. My ex was raised in a wealthy household. After we moved in together, I discovered she would let her bills and car payment fall past due, knowing her father would eventually pay them. At some point, she lost her job, and her father refused to help until she found another one. In the meantime, I tried to get us onto a monthly budget and had to teach her how to shop for groceries a few weeks at a time and how to manage when there wasn't enough money for everything. I foolishly added her to my limited data phone plan, and in 1 month she incurred $600 in data overage charges and refused to split the bill with me. I was naive and in my early 20s, but it took me too long to call it quits. After we broke up and I moved out, she got evicted. I hope she has figured out how to manage adult responsibilities since then. Story 42. It took me too long to realize this, but recently I ended things because he kept saying that when I move back in with him, he won't do certain things anymore and that things will change. After 10 years, nothing changed. He is an alcoholic and bought alcohol again despite being broke and owing me and others money, so I finally said no. He is never going to change. Any hope I had left is gone. Story 43. He would only hold hands when we were alone and drunk. He barely kissed me and wouldn't be seen in public with me unless we acted as friends. Story 44. He constantly compared my paralyzed leg to his residual limb and made me feel like my disability wasn't significant, despite being paralyzed on one side of my body in multiple places. He used therapeutic language to manipulate me. When I wanted to share the good time I had with a couple of friends, it was my very first convention and I had a blast. He completely ignored me. That's when I realized I was just a means for him to feel better about himself. Story 45. They only talked about themselves and made no effort to get to know me. They couldn't even tell me the name of the college I was attending after almost a year of being friends. Story 46. Sadly, it wasn't the physical and emotional abuse, nor the name-calling of my special needs child. No, I was too naive to leave for just that. It was when she left me and flew across the country for another man she met online 2 months prior and told me to wait a few months until she was done with him, and then she would move back and marry me. Story 47. Emotional immaturity and unavailability, indecisiveness, inability to keep his promises, and a lack of self-awareness are evident. His words do not align with his actions, he plays the victim, and ultimately, he prioritizes his own interests while presenting himself as a good person to the outside world. Story 48. I don't know why I am sharing, but I guess I am just feeling talkative. This is about some heavy topics, so read with caution. I had very low self-esteem and didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like after being groomed by an older man in my teens. I thought this new guy was the best thing that could ever happen to me. On the outside, he was put together, age-appropriate, dressed nicely, had a promising job, was cultured, and spoke several languages. However, we would fight a lot, and it would always be about how horrible I was for not texting him, seeing my friends without letting him know first, or having a drink. I would beg for him to forgive me to the point of groveling on the ground. He derived some kind of sadistic joy from this and would berate me until he had his fill, leaving me triggered, upset, and feeling worthless. He would say the only way I could get him to forgive me was if I sent him explicit pictures or engaged in sexual acts, even when I told him I was not in the mood. He asked me to do things in degrading ways. During that time, he would talk dirty to me while also reminding me of how I had wronged him, insisting that I deserved everything I got. This wasn't all the time. He was nice just enough for me to think this wasn't who he was and that it was me who was wrong. I tried to balance this by keeping him happy, giving up sex, and even paying his rent for his second apartment in a metropolitan city for several months, because he claimed he didn't like it and couldn't afford to rent another place. I was totally blind and deep in it. My brain was essentially mush. I had bought into his narrative. He broke up with me so many times, only to come back a few days later for me to grovel. One night, he came home drunk and high and started telling me I was a loser with no drive and that he could not stand to be with me anymore. Right then, I don't know what happened. A flicker of light on his face, the smell of liquor, the slight slur of his words. Something just clicked and I snapped out of this 3-year hypnotic state. I remember feeling really sick and disgusted by him. I was very heartbroken, but I also felt angry and tired, and I realized I could just leave. And so I did. He did his regular routine, trying to coerce me into sex again a couple of days later. I told him he had spent so much time ruining who I was that neither of us truly knew me as a person. My only interaction with him after that was trying to get him to send my belongings from his second apartment, which I had paid for. He ended up throwing it all in the trash, telling me I was poor and my belongings were cheap anyway. I told him I would only speak to him if he returned my things, and I stuck to that promise. He ended up sending me an apology years later, about 2 sentences. Then he sent a paragraph about how I could improve my career. What a loser. If you ever have that moment of clarity like I had, please do not ignore it. Listen to that voice. Run. Please. Story 49. As the relationship progressed, I realized that he didn't love me for who I am, but for the fact that I met his expectations. I was attractive, well-educated, articulate, and career-oriented. The qualities he valued most in me were those I valued least in myself. This realization, along with several other factors, led to the end of the relationship. I have absolutely no regrets. Story 50. She was my big crush and I asked her out. However, she evaded the question, so I understood she wasn't interested. I respectfully moved on. Story 51. She kept trying to change me, and I knew what she was doing. At that time, I was so toxic that I would just watch her get aggravated. I was going to keep it going until my best friend made me look in the mirror and realize I was being disrespectful. Story 52. This was not a romantic relationship, but a guy I hung out with randomly decided to start talking about his views as a race realist one day. I think that's the term for it, anyway. Basically, the core concept was he thought that there was scientific proof that white and East Asian people were the only groups that could possess the intelligence necessary to form societies, build things, or handle complicated jobs. For example, in the medical field, in law, as an airline pilot, in construction, and so on. He went on a long rant about how anyone who was not white or East Asian could not have an IQ score higher than 85. He told a story about how he skipped a flight because the pilot was black, which to him meant that the plane was more likely to crash. There was also a story about how he would not go to a certain fast food restaurant because they hired too many people who spoke Spanish. They spoke English too, but I guess speaking Spanish at all was a deal breaker. He got pretty mad when I wasn't on board with these ideas. He had given no prior indication that he held beliefs like that, and I'm not sure what sparked him to bring it up out of the blue. It was completely random. I decided I didn't want to stick around someone who was likely to be unkind to some of my other friends. Story 53. I took her to my best friend's photography exhibition. My friend had been battling depression after the death of his long-term partner. Photography was his outlet. My partner spent most of the evening on her phone. She took a quick glance at one of the framed photographs, a beautiful black and white portrait of my best friend's partner. She chuckled and said it was no wonder my friend had depression if his partner looked like that. Story 54. I was dating this guy. I was a vegetarian and he was not. After dinner, he tried to kiss me for the first time. I liked him, but instead of kissing me, he literally licked my entire face because he had just eaten ribs. This was long ago, and I never contacted him again. Story 55. He couldn't talk about issues face to face. It had to be over text. We would sit in the same room and text about our problems. I had to ask him to please not joke about putting me on a diet. He blamed his communication issues on his parents. Story 56. When I started to dread our time together because they often had something to be upset with me about, managing their expectations for our relationship felt like a full-time job. Story 57. I had been suffering in my long marriage for a long time. While the good times were fine, I maintained that because I didn't want to confront a sometimes abrasive partner. She claims she never knew how bad it was. I finally realized it would never get better, and I would spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells. Although that was tolerable, it wasn't what I truly wanted from life. Story 58. Probably the tunic he threw at my head was hard enough to dent the metal closet door. He always said he would not follow in his father's abusive footsteps. He was wrong. Story 59. The guy I was seeing was very sweet, and we had a lot of fun during our first month of dating. We went out for drinks with my sister and her boyfriend. My sister conveniently got drunk an hour into the night and had to go home. I told her I would meet her there, but I ended up getting locked out for the night without a phone charger, wallet, or car keys. No worries, the guy I was with said I could stay with him. Shouldn't be a big deal, right? He immediately tried to get me to perform oral sex and then pushed my hand down to show that he wasn't wearing pants when we settled in for the night. It didn't register with him that my saying no multiple times, being 3:30 a.m., and that I was in an unfamiliar city at his mercy would make me very uncomfortable, which is absolutely insane. We clicked so well, and I wanted to be intimate with him, just not in that way. At least he showed me it was just a facade early on, I guess. Story 60. He was very attractive and witty, and we liked the same things. He had a good job as a veterinary technician and was an all-around really good guy. Then I went over to his house. It was very untidy. Dishes were left in stagnant sink water, clothes were all over the floor, and old food was left out. There was a smell of urine throughout the home from his pet rats. This was after he cleaned the house for my visit. Immediate no. We're still very good friends, but all attraction disappeared as soon as I saw his home. Story 61. A few months ago, I fulfilled a childhood dream of finishing a song with the singer of Alien Ant Farm, which was my very first CD and very sentimental to me. This was literally a dream come true. When I got home, the first thing I told her was thank you for watching the kids so I could enjoy a night out, which was her idea. Her response was, "Are you drunk?" For context, she has been sober for 8 years and I have been sober for the entire 3 years we have been together. I tried to play it off, then began to tell her about the rest of the night while still glowing from living my dream. However, she had negative things to say about everything I was discussing. I am not sure if she was jealous that I enjoyed myself or if it was something else. That single night turned me off from the entire 3-year relationship. If you can't be excited that your partner experienced something wonderful, then there is no love. Story 62. When I realized I couldn't have an intelligent conversation with a person whose mind was as empty as her personality. Story 63. After she cheated on me for the second or third time, I discovered that one of her affairs involved money. I also kept finding cut straws hidden around the house. This was after I returned to shared custody following her failed drug test. Yes, I realize I was foolish. Story 64. The double standards this person clearly believed in are evident. He wanted to have as many sexual partners as he desired while expecting a faithful wife. No, thank you. Story 65. When he told me how he and his team prayed before every football game for God to help them win, I laughed. He asked me what was so funny. I do believe in God, but praying for your high school football team to win seems ridiculous. Story 66. We were in a long-distance relationship. He was unemployed, had dropped out of school, and had accumulated significant credit card debt. He spent 50 hours a week playing video games and told me he couldn't commit to calling me once a day or communicating with me when he wasn't able to call. Story 67. I realized that the person I thought I wanted to date, through no fault of theirs, made me anxious and on edge. I was trying too hard to be the perfect girlfriend and was subconsciously looking for reasons for it not to work. I wasn't ready for the relationship. Story 68. He got really upset with me for choosing an intrauterine device as my birth control. He went on about how it was an unhealthy choice. After I got it anyway and was doubled over in pain and barely able to walk, he asked me, "So where did they put it? In your arm or something?" Story 69. We were supposed to meet at my college. The parking lot is at the bottom of a hill. I had to walk up the hill and search for him because he said he was there. It turned out he was watching me the whole time, sulking and drinking coffee. He didn't even get up to greet me. He also sniffed me loudly in front of my friends as a joke, which left me feeling embarrassed and annoyed. In a different situation, he didn't tell me until the day before our date that he had a haircut. I waited alone in a park for a long time, even though it was hot outside. I enjoy nature, so when he arrived, I was happily pointing out plants and animals, but he didn't seem to care. I realized we just didn't vibe together, so I had to end things. Story 70. I realized I had become the unofficial psychologist for her, and she was unloading her trauma on me while constantly lying. One time, I shared something bad from my past, and she responded, "At least you weren't raped like me." I knew she was lying. She had previously told me that her experience was more about couch surfing while traveling, where a man she was with wanted to have sex, and she went along with it. It was a casual one-night stand. That story turned into a narrative of rape because she felt the need to compete with my trauma. It took 3 weeks to finally distance myself from her. Story 71. When she served me papers and made me pay $40,000 in legal fees to give her half, which is what I offered at the start. In retrospect, there were probably warning signs. Story 72. When I heard her talking to her sisters about something and unknowingly revealing that she had lied to me. Story 73. We went on a trip together and I learned how different we are. Random encounters were not for me, and alcohol was not for him. He preferred every detail to be carefully planned and liked to be in control. It was not a good fit. Story 74. This woman I was connecting with suggested I meet her at a local restaurant and hang out. When I arrived, she was sitting at a video slot machine. I knew she liked to play the occasional scratch ticket, and she seemed to have good luck with them. However, that kind of luck tends to run out quickly on video slot machines. It was an instant turn-off, so I decided to leave. Story 75. I'm torn between my impulsive behavior and my attempts to control it. The selfishness that I haven't addressed, the constant yelling at my dogs, the sudden lack of both physical and emotional intimacy, and my own shallowness. None of these issues were present before they moved in, and I must say, I am not a fan of any of it. Story 76. When she told me I could go away after my mom died in her sleep, I was already on the fence about this girl because of her addiction and her fascination with telling me everything my ex-wife was doing around town. Story 77. I discovered that my former partner had anonymous social media accounts solely for adult content and struggled with a pornography addiction. It's a battle you will never win with them, even if you plead for them to stop. Story 78. When she began getting angry at everything I did to the point where every waking moment felt like walking on eggshells, I told her that I felt there was nothing I could do to make her happy. I thought it was time to part ways, and she was genuinely shocked. Story 79. He was way too intense. I know we were kids, but he talked about intimate experiences and sweet hometown matters, claiming he wasn't a virgin. At first, I thought this was fine until I realized he probably just wanted a casual relationship, especially since I had and still have no experience. So, this was definitely not what I thought real love was. Story 80. Giggles at phone while hanging out one-on-one. What are you laughing at? Just this guy I used to talk to. We got along for about a year, but then he annoyed me, and I haven't talked to him in 3 months. Then, big surprise, she spent 4 months pushing her way into every aspect of my daily life, while telling me that I shouldn't let my social traumas stop me from trusting people and making friends, only for her to stop talking to me because apparently the stress of my sister disappearing from rehab wasn't a good reason to be upset. Even that explanation had to be forced out of her because she had largely just started ignoring me out of nowhere. Story 81. After 5 years, I couldn't even type, "I miss you too." I appreciated his honesty by omission, though. I realized I was wasting my time with someone who didn't value me, even though he asked for a commitment. It's been 6 months, and I'm still upset about it. Oh well. Story 82. When I said I wanted to hold off on getting married because we were fighting a lot, he responded with, "Okay, I'm sorry. No more lessons, no more games, no more double standards." Upon further questioning, he explained that he had been using games to teach me lessons about behaviors he didn't like, such as having friends or going to therapy. We had an explosive and painful breakup about 11 years ago. He ruined my credit, my sobriety, my sense of self, and my mental health. I also suspect he's reading this. Story 83. I began to look forward less and less to spending time with them. We would make plans, and I no longer anticipated them at all. It was a simple realization, but that's when I knew it was time to end the relationship. We are still very good friends, but dating began to feel like an obligation. Story 84. He admitted he hurt me because I had hurt him and he wanted me to feel what it was like. It was all fairly minor. He was upset that I became weird and jealous once. Honestly, at this point, it was hard to tell what he was upset about, and he had gone quiet and distant. We had broken up but were still talking, and we had a huge argument on the phone where he expressed this. I realized he was not the person I thought he was. He went on to yell at me for breaking his heart, even though he was the one who ended the relationship, and I never received an explanation for what I did wrong. It was honestly baffling, but good luck to him, I guess. Story 85. Southern Belle elements combined with Republican posturing learned from Fox News, essentially expressing nonsensical ideas with a charming accent. Story 86. When I was 18, I had a crush on a girl who was 2 years older than me. She was cute, beautiful, independent, and cool. All that fun stuff. She moved in next door with her friend, who also happened to be my friend, so we got acquainted pretty quickly. She was easy to get along with. It felt like we were on the same wavelength. As the days went by and our interactions became more frequent, I found myself slowly growing fond of her. She'd often hitch a ride in my car whenever she needed to go grocery shopping since she didn't have one of her own yet. She always seemed a bit embarrassed when she needed a ride to work or somewhere nearby. She'd go on and on about how, once she got her new car, she'd gladly drive me and our friends anywhere we wanted. A few months later, her new sports utility vehicle finally arrived. I half expected her to make good on those promises, but nothing happened. In fact, she started to distance herself. The cheerful greetings and good mornings disappeared. Even though she still lived with my friend, we barely talked. I got to ride in her car once or twice, but only reluctantly on her part. I have this habit of closing car doors a bit harder than necessary. I've had issues before with not shutting them fully, so now I overcompensate. Every time I do it, I make sure to apologize. One time, after I closed her car door a bit too firmly, she sarcastically told me to slam it harder next time. I apologized, of course, and shrugged it off as a bad day. But then, our mutual friend started pointing out how irritable she'd get over little things in her car. Someone closing the door too hard, putting a bag on an empty seat, even just asking for a ride. That's when the rose-colored glasses came off. Whatever feelings I had for her just faded. We still talk sometimes and remain friends, but I've accepted that she's a bit superficial and overly sensitive. And that's okay. Some people are just better admired from a distance. Story 87. When her mom called Walmart to make a tire change appointment and said, "This is XYZ's wife." My ex had no issue with it. Story 88. His family mistreated me whenever they had the opportunity, and he was unable to support me. I understand that there is a lot of trauma behind his actions, but I could not continue to put my mental health at risk. Story 89. Telling me I was a downer after the death of my grandmother, who was like a mother to me, is one example. Another example includes the temper tantrums and violent outbursts like punching walls and trying to control every little thing I did, including how I used lotion or toothpaste. Additionally, there was withholding money so that I was stranded and not being paid after I helped at construction sites. Story 90. When he said he hasn't loved me for the past 2 years, that was many years ago now. The smallest, most important part of me as a wife and a romantic shriveled up and died after that, and everything else that loved him followed. He had put me through so much and would put me through more, and for him to say that, I will probably be haunted by those few moments forever. Everything on his face, the chill behind his gaze, indicated that he truly meant it and intended to hurt me with it. Thinking about it makes me physically ill and always will. Story 91. When I realized that everything I was doing with my life was an attempt to connect with him, rather than something I genuinely wanted to do, I felt lost. I invested so much time trying to engage in his hobbies and interests, bending over backwards to change myself for even the smallest amount of affection. For the longest time, I couldn't understand why I was so miserable and no longer felt like myself. Story 92. When I attended my sister's wedding, I saw her dance with her husband. The way they looked at each other made me realize I would never share that gaze with my girlfriend at the time. Story 93. He threw an entire pan full of food he was cooking across the kitchen at me, and then slammed my head backwards into the wall until he left a hole. I had a seizure when I asked if he could please stop yelling while the baby was sleeping. Then he tried to kill me when I broke up with him. He is definitely not the right person for me. Story 94. I had been getting to know my new classmates when I went to college a few years later. One very friendly girl, who was in a long-term relationship herself, became good friends with my fiancé and me. We had a few classes together, worked in groups for projects, and were cast in the spring play. She was very silly and affectionate with everyone. Not just me. Just a sweetheart. She had broken up with her boyfriend for about a month, and we were sitting on a couch in a common area at school. She dozed off, and her head leaned over and rested on my shoulder. I looked over at her and smiled. I felt something click in my brain. I said, out loud and under my breath, "Oh no." A year later, I was engaged to her, and we will celebrate 17 years of marriage in 2 weeks. That was how I knew my first fiancé was not the person for me. Story 95. I saw a stray dog get hit and killed by a car. When I got home, I called my girlfriend to talk to her about it because it really shook me. She was upset with me for mentioning it and making her think about it. Story 96. One fun story. One time I was cooking in her kitchen and I ended up cutting the tip of my finger. It was not a bad cut, but it was bleeding enough. She went to find me a bandage, and all she had were those tiny little adhesive strips. She put one on and went to get another. It wasn't set just right, no big deal, so I went to adjust it a bit. When she turned back around and noticed me adjusting it, she stopped and said, "Whoa, where's the trust?" What? We ended up having a big conflict because I didn't trust her enough to apply the tiny bandages perfectly to my finger. I guess. Sadly, I stuck it out for too long and foolishly hoped she would change. But that was one of many memorable moments I had with her. I don't know if she was a true narcissist, but she certainly displayed many of the traits associated with it. Story 97. For me, it was a bit late when I realized, but having to drag this person to plan for the future gave me a clear picture of what raising a family with her would be like. Unfortunately, when I talked to her about my struggles with some of her irresponsible behaviors as we planned our wedding, she kept assuring me that her first priority was getting the wedding out of the way and that everything else would be fixed afterward. Didn't. Story 98. I was always accused of cheating whenever I went out, only to discover that she was the one being unfaithful all along. When I expressed my desire to end the relationship, she even attempted to bite and stab me. Story 99. When we went for hikes, he would speed ahead of me and then make me feel awful for being out of shape and slow. It seemed like he was always racing to the summit, while I preferred to stop and look at the flowers. I realized this was a perfect analogy for our personalities. He wanted to constantly achieve goals, which isn't a bad thing. However, we were never on the same speed or wavelength. I desire a slow, relaxing life without the feeling of competition, while he needed adventure and action all the time. So we amicably parted ways. Story 100. He deliberately squashed a snail after I told him to be careful of it. So-called small things say a lot. Many small things added up and painted a negative picture. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.